quagmire of research and the supervision process. Now, to start off with, we're in this Teams environment, and that's always a little bit difficult because I never get to see people. So it's not like standing in front of a class and you are seeing me and I'm seeing you, and our interaction back and forward is sometimes a little bit difficult. But what I'm going to do today, I'm going to try this, if this is going to work. I'm going to share my screen with you right now, and what you see now is a website, and it's called, I hope you can see this, it's called www.menti.com. And if you can and you type in menti.com, you'll get a prompt asking you for a code, and you can type in that code that you see on the screen, 270865. And this is a very simple website, and what you're going to see is you're going to see the prompt which says, write 3 things to describe your ideal supervisor. And there's going to be these little 3 blocks, and you can fill in whatever you like there to describe your ideal supervisor. It's absolutely anonymous, so no one will know who's writing what. But as you write that stuff and you submit it, on the screen that we are seeing right here, a word cloud is going to come about, and we're going to see what the ideal supervisor looks like coming out of the audience that's looking at this right now. So, folk, if you can, I'm going to encourage you to just open the web browser, because I'm thinking everyone is somehow connected online at the moment, and just go to menti.com and type in that code, and then give us your 3 things that describe your ideal supervisor. And don't write the essay, okay? So 1 word is good, or a few words, that's also okay, but don't write an essay. 1 or 2 words describing your ideal supervisor. What is it that you would say is the ideal supervisor? Ah, there we have one already. A superhero. Okay, fair enough. Supportive and empathetic. Hofsire. I must say some of my students are here. That's not fair. Resourceful, available, flexible, involved, patient, understanding. Right, and there that cloud is busy building. Effective communicator, honest, devoted, good guidance, mentor, time conscious, reads. Oh, we're going to get into that a little bit later about reading and feedback. So absolutely, this is really interesting, and I'm glad this is working, because it means I'm getting some interaction from the from everyone who's listening here, and I can see supportive, understanding, patient. Those are really big themes that are coming out here, and I think this is almost a fun way of going about giving one of these webinars, because this is something we'd of course be able to do when we look at each other face to face, but right now in this environment it's always difficult to have that two-way communication. Checks up on you, there's another one. Right, so reliable. So folk, what we are seeing here is we're seeing a great deal of desirable, at least what you think is desirable in a ideal supervisor. So completely a different question of, is the supervisor really like that? But this is how you are describing your ideal supervisor. And this is something that you've already been busy with because you're in this research degree and you've been interacting with this person called the supervisor, and there is a whole bunch of things that you think you would like to see in them, and it's getting more and more and more. What I'm observing from this word cloud, open mind, connected. What I'm seeing from this word cloud is, while there is some themes coming out, so certainly supportive is right there in the middle and it's big, and we've got available and understanding and patient, but around that there is a tremendous amount of smaller or less focused things that you would like to see in your ideal supervisor. So, folk, I'm going to say thank you very much for taking part with me in this activity. I'm going to now stop sharing the screen, and then I'm going to go and turn on some PowerPoint. But what I want to show out here is the let's remember what this word cloud picture looks like and how many of the things are that people would like to see. And let me just share my PowerPoint. We need to just go all the way to the beginning. Right, folks, so we had our word cloud that we've just looked at, and I asked you to write down 3 things to describe your ideal supervisor. And you did that, and I thought that exercise worked quite nicely. And you probably saw what other people were thinking as well, and do you agree with them or not? So now the one aspect that I'm going to now absolutely throw out there, and that is quite a serious one, and that is pretty much, does your supervisor know this? Okay, does the supervisor know what you need during that supervision process? So you've now put out those words. You've described your supervisor's 3 ideal characteristics. Does your supervisor know this? Does your supervisor know this? That's a good point. Then, secondly, how would your supervisor describe the ideal student? Right, so I haven't done this exercise with any of the supervisors, so don't worry. And I haven't gotten them all together in a room and asked them to write down 3 things to describe the ideal student. But if you had to visualize your supervisor right now, how would your supervisor describe the ideal student? Okay, think about that. It doesn't matter if you are that ideal student or not. It's what is your supervisor looking for in that ideal student? So we've got the ideal supervisor and we've got the ideal student. And what I'm quite convinced of is that if we ask the supervisors to write down one of these word clouds, it would be just as busy and complicated as the one that we've just seen, with you asking or you telling us what your ideal supervisor looks like. So this leads me to one very, very, very important point, and that is every student supervisor pair is unique. Okay? What you think an ideal supervisor is, and the ideal student that the supervisor thinks you are, that is unique for every combination of student and supervisor. It's utterly unique. So right now, the question that I'm going to ask you is, do you know each other's expectations? Now, most of the time, when you start on the process of a research degree, you sort of course, greet each other. You've chatted about the work already. You are both sort of happy that according to each other's interests in topic, you are well suited to each other. But the real question is, do you know each other's personal expectations? So now both of you have the expectation of graduating one day, and that's a good expectation to have. But expectations about the process. Do you expect your supervisor to be hands-off? In other words, you don't want to be interfered with a lot. Or do you expect the supervisor to be giving you closer guidance? The supervisor probably doesn't know that unless you've actually had that discussion. This is a discussion that normally we don't have. And normally we just tend to go along with the process, and we just hope for the best and we drift along. And to some extent that does work. But if you're just drifting along without actually understanding each other, it's not nearly as effective as sitting down and having that really sometimes difficult discussion of what do each of you expect from each other. And even if you aren't able to achieve that idealness of being the ideal student or the supervisor being the ideal supervisor, at least you know where each other, where you're coming from. And then you can work towards that. So no one is going to be the ideal student and no one is going to be the ideal supervisor. But knowing the expectations makes it so much, very much easier. So if that's the only thing that you take away from today, is know your supervisor's expectations and vice versa. And if your supervisor hasn't initiated this discussion with you, which normally doesn't happen, then you initiate it with your supervisor. Sometimes this kind of a discussion is a little bit uncomfortable because you sort of have to open up, both the student and the supervisor, and people tend to run away from it. And that's why things just sort of drift along on their own. But this is something to actively pursue, and I'm in a tough position here because I know in this webinar some of my students are sitting, and yes, they're going to be asking, did I do this with them? And yeah, that's something I need to worry about as well. But folk, know each other's expectations. That's important. Right. Then we're going to look at a couple of other things that I think are vitally important in this supervision thing. Now, it goes to the role of the supervisor and what should they be doing. Right. So now in South Africa, right, in South Africa, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, those countries, in the academic system, when you're busy with a research degree, a higher degree, there is somebody called a supervisor that's looking after you. And they are sort of interacting with you. Now, let's say the old colonies of the United Kingdom, yeah, we've been colonized for sure. The old colonies of the United Kingdom all follow the same model of academics and universities, and they all have this thing called the supervisor. Now, the supervisor, this word that says supervisor, personally, I absolutely do not like this word supervisor. Now, what we call things is important because it influences how we think about them. Right, so you can say the thing doesn't change depending on what you call it, and that's true, it doesn't, but how we think about the thing does change depending on what we call it. So now here I'm seeing the word supervisor, and the word supervisor is to me a synonym for boss. Right, so if you are in employment somewhere and you have a boss, then the boss is the person who tells you what to do, and it's the person who you need to keep happy. And if you do what the boss says, then you're okay and you get your salary. The boss or the supervisor is the person who issues instruction. Okay, now, of course, we know that's not true for the research supervisor, but the fact that that word is supervisor, it creates that mental picture, and that mental picture is shaping our expectations. So I'm going to say that word is not a good word, and I'd actually like to change that word, and maybe that is something that we should do. Let's go and have a look at what happens if you're in the USA. If you're in the USA and you're busy with a piece of research, then you don't have a supervisor. In the USA, you've got an advisor. Right, so that's painting a different kind of a picture. Of course, the person is doing exactly the same interaction, but the expectation that you might have from someone called an advisor is very different. Then, if you are in the Netherlands, you have someone called a promotor. Now, that's in Dutch, and if we had to translate promotor into English, we'd pretty much have something that sounds like cheerleader. Okay, so that's someone who's cheering you on with your research. Cheerleader or initiator or prime mover. It's pretty much got to do with a great deal of encouragement. Okay, so that's if you're in the Netherlands. If you were in Germany, you have someone called a Doktorvater or a Doktormutter. So that translates to as the doctor father or the doctor mother. And okay, so I'm going to say that the word doctor means PhD. I'm going to have that imply all research. So it's your research father or your research mother. So now that's, of course, if you're doing a research degree in Germany. Now all these four people it's the same person, but they're being described differently. And I think that's very, very important. So if you are thinking of that person you interact with for your degree as your father or your mother for research, that's painting a sort of a different kind of a picture. That's a caregiver. That's a caregiving role, and is very different from the role of a boss. So even though these people are all the same person, they're just being called something different. What we call them greatly influences on how we think about them. So how we think about that person also influences how we feel about that person. So you're going to feel differently about your parent, your research parent, than what you are going to feel about your research boss. So it's a mindset thing, and you might be thinking we're busy with semantics here, but it's more important than that. It is hectically important how you feel about that person. So it's about a mindset thing. Then the next part that I will chat about, we saw this in the word cloud. My supervisor takes forever to give feedback. Okay, this is a very common complaint, and I'm first of all going to ask why. Why does your supervisor take so long? Your supervisor doesn't take long on marking exams or on preparing for class or attending meetings, or supervisor meets many deadlines because that's their job. Why are they not able to give feedback in good time? Because this is something that always comes up, is my supervisor takes forever or sometimes never gives feedback. And let's go and look at that process. So to start off with, this is what happens during the supervision, during the process. You come along with your work and you say, here's my draft. This is a draft proposal, a draft literature review, a draft thesis or dissertation. And you ask your supervisor, what do you think? Okay, so you give them this draft and it's a big document. By definition, it's a draft, which means it's not finished. Okay, so it's getting there, but it's not complete. So it's partially complete. And you're asking, what do you think? Now, remember, we're busy with research, and in research, the unknown is what it's all about. So now what the supervisor needs to do is the supervisor needs to read that draft, and that's probably not too tough. Supervisor reads the draft. Then, based on the draft, which is a complete document, right? It's not finished yet. It's got flaws, it's errors, it's work in progress, and that's okay because it's a draft. The supervisor reads it. Then what they've got to do in their mind is they've got to visualize the final thing. And they've got to ask, what would this work look like? So if you're busy with a PhD and you've gotten the literature review of your PhD finished, then they read that literature review and they have to visualize the entire PhD. So they've got to do the PhD in their mind, visualize what the final work would look like, then compare your draft against the final work, and then advise and say, maybe you should be doing this or maybe you should be doing that. Of course, that is a cognitive overload on your supervisor. And they might not even tell you that, but what you are asking them to do is incredibly difficult. And they're going to try, but that process is horrendously long, and it is incredibly difficult and stressful. So it takes almost forever because they don't actually know what to say, because visualizing this final thing is almost impossible. And if they can't visualize that final thing, they can't advise you how to turn the draft into the final thing. So what I'm going to suggest is you never ever ask them what they think. You ask for targeted feedback. something that is undeniably easy. So you give them the draft, and you don't ask, what do you think? You ask something targeted. Do you think reference 2 is needed to support the argument of novelty? So now this is something that is much easier to sort out in your mind. So the supervisor sees this, and they look at your draft with the eyes of, first of all, the argument of novelty, and they analyzing that argument of novelty, and they are figuring out, is reference 2 really needed or not? And immediately the feedback becomes a lot easier, because now they know exactly what to do. It isn't this arbitrary thing of what might the future look like, and they trying now to link up what the future might look like with what your draft is saying. You've asked for something concrete. That's going to be a lot easier. Or you say, in my draft, do you think my claim of X in my conclusion is strong enough? Here is an outline of the argument. So now the supervisor knows exactly what to do, and they're busy assessing this this claim of X that you have in your conclusion, and they can work through the outline of your argument and give you good feedback of telling you where something is missing or where something needs strengthening. So that's something to really target, is when it comes to feedback, do not ask for general feedback. The best you can get is the supervisor starts giving you crazy feedback. So you've given them the draft of your literature review, and then they tell you things like, the headings need to be indented more, or I don't like your font, or here's a comma that's missing, or there's a spelling mistake. That's not the kind of feedback you're looking for. You're not looking for a language editor. You want actual feedback on the substance of what's going on. And if in the absence of a targeted request, you aren't going to get very good feedback, and it's also going to take forever. Okay, so that's the reason why things take forever. Then, last one that I'm going to deal with is a tough one. It comes back to our objective of the degree. So what is our degree all about? Our degree, our research degree, is about you as a person becoming a researcher. Okay, it's about change. And for researcher, I'm going to say you're an intellectual, you're a thinker. That's all the same thing. So the research degree is about you becoming a different person. And that person is let's call them a mental athlete. So they're a high-level thinker. So now, change is, of course, very difficult. But that's why you're busy with that research degree, because you want to change. You want to become that researcher, that intellectual, that thinker. So change is very difficult. And how does this change happen? So now there's a huge amount of literature on the science of high performance. And most of that has been developed for the sports environment. But it's the same thing. We have high performance in almost every field. High performance might be in sport. It might be you're training to become a chess grandmaster, or you're training to become a PhD or a MSc graduate. So pretty much how that change process works is very simple. And the change process is pretty much based on inducing a micro stress. Okay, so you're making something uncomfortable in your mind or body. You shift. So in other words, you're outside of your comfort zone. And then you have the mind or body adapt. So this is the same thing as if you are sort of training to run a marathon, and you are running 1 kilometer. Then you are stressing the muscles in your legs a little bit, and the muscles get sore, so they're stressed. And then what happens? Your body adapts. Why? Because the muscles become stronger. And you continue with this process, and you get stronger and stronger and stronger all the time. So now exactly the same thing is happening in your research. You are becoming this researcher, and what's happening? You've got a lot of these micro stresses, and what's happening? Your mind is adapting slowly and continuously. And of course, this process is repeating all the time. So now this is the way you become that mental athlete, because you are physically going to change your mind during this process of your research degree. You are becoming that stronger person, the intellectual, the thinker, the mental athlete, and that's not trivial. So now quickly we are going to take a small digression, and we are going to I'm going to keep all that stuff that I had previously on the previous slide, we're going to take a quick 30-second excursion into attribution bias. And what is attribution bias? Well, a bias is a mental process, and attribution is about giving cause. So saying why is something the way it is. So now the attribution bias is a mental process inside you. It's inside all humans. And pretty much it's a shortcut way of trying to make sense of the world around you. And the 30-second view of the attribution bias is if something good is happening, it's because of you. If something bad is happening, it's because of them. To give you an example, let's consider that something good that was happening was you as an undergrad student, you were getting a distinction in one of your exams. What did you say when you got a distinction in your exam? You said, I did very well. It was about me. I did very well. I studied hard. I'm very good. I'm learning the material. Something good happened. It was you. Something bad happened. What happened? You failed the exam. What do you say? It was unfair. The lecturer was being nasty. I couldn't study because the people next door were making a noise. There is some them. So the bad is them and the good is me. Now, it could be that that really was the case, okay? But irrespective of what really is the case, this is going on in your mind all the time. Something good, you tend to think it's you. Something bad, you tend to think it's something else. So now how does that affect what we are talking about? Well, we're inducing the microstress to have our mind and body adapt. So as we introduce a microstress, that's bad, it's unpleasant, it's uncomfortable, so that's bad, we attribute it to them. The change that we have, the mind or the body adapting, is good, so we attribute it to ourselves. Now, normally, your supervisor is the one who's causing the microstress because they're putting you under pressure, and that's bad, so you're complaining about the supervisor. As you adapt, as you become better, so your paper is published, that's good. So you say, I'm amazing. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing this. This is a normal human condition. But it tends to have it tends to place your supervisor in a bad position when they are doing what causes you to become that mental athlete. So we tend to think poorly of the supervisor while that process is happening because it's unpleasant. Of course, if this micro stress is turning into a major stress, then you get injury. That's no good. So you don't want to have that happen. But normally, with any student, there will be a time when they absolutely hate their supervisor. And I'm expecting that in all of my own students as well. So I know that they're going to go through that phase, and I'm ready for that. And I'm going to be there to help them get through that phase when they think I'm absolutely terrible. And if they haven't experienced that yet, then watch out, it's coming. They will think that I'm really, really bad at certain times. And then when they get through that micro stress phase and they're adapting and they're flying and they're becoming that mental athlete, then they feel good and it's fantastic and it's all about them, and that's okay because it really was all about them. So that is one of the reasons why sometimes you think your supervisor is really terrible when in actual fact it's this process of your mind changing that's really causing that. So folk, that is the all of what I've said can be summed up pretty much for supervisors and supervision is know yourself, okay? Know what's going on in yourself, and also know that other person. And if you want to start some student activism to get that word supervisor changed in our university, I'm absolutely supportive of that because I think it's a really bad word. So know yourself and know that other person. And then you are going to be very much in a better place with your supervision. Now, certainly I will acknowledge that there are times when that other person that we're calling a supervisor right now, that other person absolutely falls apart and has pretty much abandoned you. That does happen, and that needs to be dealt with. And maybe we can talk about that in the questions section. But what I'm saying is most of the time that utter breakdown of the supervisor-student relationship, that utter and total breakdown, that is rare. And that maybe only occurs in about 1% of the cases, even though we think it occurs a lot more often. Most of the time, it's those mental processes that we are going through which are so tough to deal with. But it's necessary to get through to that development stage where we become that mental athlete. So it's normal and natural to think poorly of your supervisor. It's okay. And it's also normal and natural to go up and down in your opinion of your supervisor. Sometimes they're superheroes, and sometimes they are absolutely terrible people. And that changes almost sometimes on a weekly basis. That's all okay. We will talk about if we need to in the questions and answers section about what happens when things really fall apart and there's a total breakdown. But for now, the takeaway message here is know yourself and know that other person. So folk, thank you for listening to me rabbit on about that. I see we're actually in good time, so I'll hand back to Desmond.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much. This is very enlightening. I think that once we are waiting for the questions, I would quickly allow Rodney to have some 5 to 10 minutes to also share some few nuggets with us whilst we prepare the questions. So I would suggest that those of you who want to ask questions, you can click on the raise your hand so that I can see you, or you can put the questions in the message section so that we can deal with it. Rodney, over to you.
First of all, fantastic presentation by Prof. Hofmeyr, also as usual. Really great job. I'm applauding. This would have helped me as a student coming into it. So thank you very much, Prof. Incredible presentation, I have to say. And I'm glad that our students have been able to attend that. I think what I just want to add to it is a bit of some practical implementation of some of the ideologies that have been put across. One of the things that as a recent, I graduated in 2014, so it's not too long ago, not too far from some of the generations that have come in today. And, one of the things I learned during my PhD in terms of engaging with my supervisor, who was really good, but very busy because she was managing a lot of things and is still doing it till today, was having a plan. If there's anything I can ask the students right now is, as much as you have a plan for your research, looking to graduate, whether it's in the engineering side or the built environment, one of the things that we do very well in terms of our qualification is we can make a plan. So what kind of a plan do you have around your supervisor? That was one of the first things I was quite fortunate to learn when I came in the sense that, do you have a regular structured meeting plan with your supervisor? And in those particular meeting plans, are you able to set out targets for the next 1 to 2 months and the expectations that fall into that? And I like Prof's moment when he said, supervisors are also lecturers, and there are very specific timelines they have to meet, such as we have to lecture, we have to mark, we have to make sure marks come in, because there are structures that have been put in place to accommodate that. And the reason why I'm bringing this point across is sometimes, not always, but sometimes you have a situation where there's a delayed response because maybe by the time you submitted a paper, a proposal, a particular chapter in your thesis really coincides with a really terrible or busy time for your supervisor. However, if there was an agreed plan, and I saw this work very successfully, Desmond and I were supervised by the same person, so you can attest to this. If you have a plan in place such that you say, I would like to bring it in the next 2 weeks, my supervisor would check her calendar very quickly and say, actually, Rodney, that's not really a good time. X, Y, and Z will be happening. Are you able to bring it just before? Meaning I may have to work a little bit harder so that I can get it. I wanted to bring it in 2 weeks, but now I have to work a little bit earlier, or have to come a little bit later, but maybe it might be a bad timeline for me. So having a plan is so critical. And I'm not saying that this is not something that's already happening already. And maybe sometimes you may get 1 or 2 people may not keep to that, but you will be amazed how it transforms the level of expectation between yourself and your supervisor around timelines. Having that sit-down conversation around, we meet X, Y, and Z. These are the targets over the next 3 to 4 months. These are what I hope to be able to meet. And then you can compare notes. And I think that manages so much in terms of the discourse that could follow just in times of that. Because that, for us, became a contract, which we had both agreed to. And should there have been something that came unexpectedly, we would then have a conversation where she might say, I might have to go X, Y, and Z to this because this has changed. How can we readjust our plan? And then it makes you both now almost like a partnership, if you will, on the project, as opposed to sporadic moments where maybe this may come in or that may come in. So maybe having a plan beforehand helps really with that. And another thing that I maybe wanted to just add in terms of how we have been engaging, and I like what Prof said in terms of engaging with your supervisor, is expectations. I think being in a research environment, and I think this will apply to all of us. If it hasn't happened to you already, it will come. Your research becomes something that's very close to you. It's a project that you're working on. It is your contribution to, quote unquote, your research field to humanity. And every time it gets critiqued, it's not always something that is pleasant to hear. And I know we are all in the engineering or built environment space, so maybe from other faculties, but that's almost like if you're a chef, somebody is stepping on your food. Or if you're a painter, someone disrespecting what you're bringing out. It's not that sometimes the criticism is meant to be harsh or rough, but sometimes because of the nature of the work that you're doing, and sometimes you may put in a lot of hours, and when you engage with the supervisor, it's almost like, no, this is not what I wanted, and so on, it's sort of brushed aside. And I know those moments are tough. There's two ways I would encourage us to really look, and we can engage this in the Q&A session. I'll be maybe 2 more minutes, so there's a lot of time to go into a Q&A session. But how to deal with some of this is some of those moments, what I would do is literally, and Desmond knows this very well, I would discuss with a colleague and say, am I reading this a little bit too harshly? And when you get a different pair of eyes, if they're being honest with you, because you need really good people who are honest with you as well, they might tell you, no, I think it's, maybe this may be right, or maybe how this was addressed by the supervisor might not have been correct. And then you need to also find now, once maybe what was addressed was wrong, find a way to communicate that back to your supervisor as well. Because as much as they are managing you, one of the terms I'd like to put across to you, and it's been recorded, so forgive me if you have any other academics here, is something I learned very early from my seniors when I joined at master's level was learn to also manage your supervisor. Know the expectations, know how they interpret information, know how to feed that back in, because you will be supervisors. Whether you go into research or your degree takes you into the industry or applied science route, you will be leaders again. How you manage people above you, people below you, is also a skill that you learn along the way. But just remember, it's a high pressure environment, not because you're too much under pressure, but because what you're working on is special. And sometimes how it's taken may not always rub you the right way. So how you manage those expectations become important. And those are the 2-3 points I wanted to pass across. And maybe the last thing I noticed in the little exercise that Prof did at the beginning is I didn't read the word trusting when the attributes of a supervisor. One of the things that I valued a lot was to be trusted by my supervisor, to be able to, because I really wanted the independence to do the work I was trying to do. So that's another attribute that I hope if you're able to manage your engagement with the supervisor, it can get to a point where they can trust you. And maybe we can deal with that in the Q&A session. But with that, thank you very much. We've got 20 minutes, so I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Desmond.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodney. I think let me quickly also point this thing out whilst Prof and Rodney prepare for the various questions. One of the things, like Rodney said, one of the things that I would also advise that you do is to get things written down and agreed upon. It is very, very important that you and your supervisor get to a point where you agree on specific timelines, deadlines, and just ensure that those deadlines work in your favor, where you all decide to agree, because this is a project that you are doing together. But remember, one of the things as a postgraduate is that you will become, after you are done, you will become something called a subject matter expert. I know Prof talked about it last 2 meetings. And also, there's that thing called the intellectual critical judgment. So it's very, very important that you sit with your supervisor, agree and say, Prof, we agreed at this time, we will do 1, 2, 3. So that if there is anything that someone needs to adjust to suit the time, it can be done. We need to learn this, and just don't take things by a verbal communication. One thing, and Rodney knows this, one thing that happens with our supervisor is the fact that after you leave her office, she will send you an email and says, we agreed on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The point is that once you have things written down. Whatever you track, you can measure. So once you track the thing, you can be able to measure whether you are meeting your own target and you are also meeting the target of your supervisor. I think those are the things I want to add to this particular communication. Prof, I think there is a question over there, and I think you go straight for it. Thanks.
Right, absolutely, Desmond. Thank you. So the question I'm seeing here is targeted feedback only possible for PhD level? How can one approach this from a master's level or lower? So I would say certainly it's valid, or it's possible at any level of research. What do we mean when we ask for targeted feedback? It pretty much means you have already got some objective that you are trying to achieve with your writing. And let's say your writing is a record of your research, so it's an objective that you're achieving with your research. And that might be even something as simple as the introduction to your research, a piece of literature survey, a piece of methodology, a piece of discussion. And it doesn't matter if you're busy with this at PhD level or at MSc level. It could be you're trying to argue the position of your work is important. And that's going to be necessary at PhD level and at MSc level. And you're trying to get this across in your writing. But you're a developing writer, and you now want to know, are you being successful with getting this message across to your reader of my work is important? So now you can ask for exactly that kind of targeted feedback and ask, in this section that I've written, or even this paragraph or this page, if you just look at this page, am I getting that message across in a good way? Is it convincing? Is it compelling? Is it evocative? Am I doing a good job with this writing? And am I achieving my message of it's important? And I think as long as you can articulate an objective, you can ask for directed feedback on it. So I would say that even goes for non-research work. If you are writing about your experiences traveling, then you can ask a fellow traveler to read your work and say, am I achieving my objective, which might be to say how awesome it was. So I would say, as long as you can articulate an objective, you can ask for targeted feedback. So, Desmond, how do you want us to deal with questions going forward? Because there's two of us here. Do you want me to just jump in, or how would you want to manage this?
It's between the two of you. You can just jump in, and then Rodney can come in and as and when he wants to come in. I think he will just highlight you then. So
I think
yes.
Thank you. I'm fully in support of your response, Prof. In terms of targeted feedback, not only just limited to PhD. I mean, we have up to 4th-year projects where we have to give this kind of responses and this kind of skills that our students need. So even from an undergraduate level, I don't see it as something that is definitely a limitation. I think if we're comfortable with that, we can maybe go to the next question. I'm just trying to make sure if Simpiwe, if you're okay with that response, maybe you can give us a thumbs up, or if you're okay with that, then maybe we can go to the next question. Desmond, is that okay?
That's
okay. Prof, do you mind if I go with this one, and then maybe you can comment? The question that reads, it's from Shandu, and it says, is it allowed or recommended to have more than one supervisor/advisor, and is it practical? So maybe I'll start with the last one, moving back, is it practical? I think in today's day and age, where research is really trying to tap into multidisciplinary platforms, where it's not just limited to one particular area, I think we've grown so much in terms of research and so many subdivisions of it, where it's sometimes practical and advisable to have more than one. Not for any other reason, but for one may bring one particular skill set and another may bring another, which is good. Always good for the student, because you've got 2 points of view. And this typically helps in terms of things like what we've just been talking about, feedback, in terms of maybe getting a quick response, in terms of some of the challenges that one supervisor may have, and another one may step in to try and intercede between some of the challenges that are going on there. So I don't see it as something that is not recommended, but I think it's also very heavily dependent on the particular subject or scope that one is doing in their research. You might find there might be only one authority. There's not so many of those still around today, I won't lie to you, because research is really expanding and growing, and we're generating a lot of researchers. So there's always somebody who can partner, but there might be one or two which are very specific. But I think it's practical, and in my opinion, makes a lot of sense to have that kind of diversity. But Prof, you can comment. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. I absolutely agree with that. And I think it's not only recommended, I think it's utterly desirable. So in some of the larger universities overseas, where sometimes the research group is as big as an entire faculty in our university, you will have you won't really have a research supervisor, you'll have a supervisory committee, and that might consist of 6 people. And they will all be looking at you and all be helping you on your research. Now, everyone brings something else to the table on that, and I think that is, of course, there's one main main person guiding the research, but all those other folk are very useful for mixing it up and having a average, which is, I think, incredibly useful. So, if it's possible to have in your own research, have a co-supervisor, I would say it's fantastic. And if it's logistically possible, I'd always welcome that. Make sure, though, one practical tip: make sure that there's an understanding amongst those co-supervisors who's the main one, because otherwise you get pulled in all different directions. But as long as there's one main one, have as many support folk as you can. It's really useful, and it's really nice to have that. There's also a movement I see these days for a let's call it a non-subject specific supervisor, often called a coach. So what that role of that person would be looking after the personal development of the student, whereas the traditional supervisor is looking after the technical aspects of the research. So it could be that you have a coach who knows absolutely nothing about your field of expertise, but they guide you on all those other things that I've been speaking about. So that's something that's coming in, but it's not there big time yet, but it's on its way. So I absolutely recommend having a couple of people looking at your work.
Thank you, Prof. I will read the next question. Maybe you can go first, and then I'll go second. This is from Sebola, and it says, changing a supervisor could be dramatic. However, we are fraught with COVID-19. And what do you do in case your supervisor felt sick and you are in chapter 3, and then chapter 3, God forbid? So maybe, Prof, you go first, and then I'll comment on it. Thank you, Prof.
Oh dear, yes, indeed, God forbid. Yes. So this, I think, is larger than just the COVID-19 situation that we're in, because it could be that even if we're not in the COVID-19 situation, that something happens and your supervisor is no longer possible and no longer able to fulfill their function. It could be that something terrible happens in their life and they're just gone. Okay, so I'm not going to say they die or anything like that, but your supervisor is just no longer available. They're gone. Then, of course, what you need to do is you're going to need to get another person. That is always difficult, because changing supervisors, even though your topic might not change, their approach to doing things is going to change. And that's going to take quite a lot of adapting on your part. So, and that's something that you're going to have to do, and because your supervisor is gone. But it's really, really a stressful thing to do, and I'd always see if it's at all possible to keep that relationship going. So even if your supervisor, let's say, gets a position at another university and they move to that other university, then I would always advise that the supervisor is still somehow involved, at a distance maybe, but is still contracted in via WITS to still be looking after your supervision. So changing supervisors is really a difficult thing to do, and I'd always say do everything possible to keep your supervisor. Although if something does happen and it's absolutely impossible to keep the supervisor, then yes, we'll get a new one, and a new one will be appointed. So as long as you are registered and you're busy with your degree, WITS will have a requirement to supply you with supervision, and they'll do that. So they'll find the best possible person, but that person will be a little bit different than your current one, and that will mean that you need to change and adapt a little bit. So Sebola, that's my take on that, but we hope nothing happens to your supervisor who is feeling sick. Rodney, anything else there?
Thank you very much, Prof. Just to add to it, let's say outside a COVID-19 situation, we do know that there have been cases where students have had to change a supervisor, and these have been due to some very, very unfortunate and possibly irreparable relations, because those do exist. And I just want to let our student body know at our institution at WITS, there are structures in place in every school, in every faculty, to ensure that if a process like this needs to happen, I want to believe in particular schools, there's a school postgraduate rep who you can speak to, who can then assist, who can put you in contact with the right people to know the rules. These things are all stipulated and placed at the faculty registry. There are all these rules and structures that are put in place should this ever come to happen. I hope none of you ever have to experience this. I do not know anyone I only know one person, actually, I lie, in the 10 years I've been at WITS who actually had to go through a process like this. As Prof has mentioned, getting a new supervisor was very challenging, but it was at that point the best option because there was an irreparable relationship between the student and the supervisor. Sorry, I've taken it completely left to a whole different channel, but I just want to let you know, as students, there is a voice, there is a structure, there are things in place. Should that reach, before even it gets there are levels for people you can speak to come in and try and intercede and engage level by level before it actually gets to a point where one may need to change a supervisor internally. But there are systems in place. I'd advise you to either engage with your school postgraduate rep or engage with faculty to find out what the rules are, what the structures are that a student can be protected should a situation like that ever need to happen. That leads me to the next question. Very similar, actually. This is from Semakanlen. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Forgive me if I'm not. It says, my supervisor is leaving soon, and already I am behind with work. Oosh, okay. How can I manage telling her that in the time given I cannot submit everything, and is it advisable to get a new supervisor in case I do not finish this year? So I'll talk very briefly, and then I'll allow Prof to come in because I'm sensitive to time. So very much, I think Prof indirectly addressed this. This was going to still be my same point. The supervisor can still be involved with your work, at least, especially if you're in the somewhat writing up or finishing stage, even if you cannot finish this year. They can still support you in terms of finishing, even if it has to spill over into next year. We've done it so many times before where supervisors have left, and typically with our faculty, they look for at least somebody within the school where you are who can assist with the supervision in their absentia, especially if there's funding implications and a particular amount of funding was given to WITS for your project. So that typically happens just so that the job can be done. I'm glad that it's in the finishing up stage. Even if you don't finish up and submit this year, you've done the bulk of the work, and that's very encouraging. It's just now a case of you being able to engage remotely. The world is a small village now with technology. So I believe WITS would still support that. But Prof, maybe you can jump in and say anything that I may have left out.
Yes, so Rodney, thank you. I absolutely agree with that. And Sema Kaleng, you are, from your question, I'm seeing two things. The first is, what happens if you are not submitting in time? And then quite right, we'll have a caretaker supervisor, and then we'll do everything that we can to keep your current supervisor still somehow involved. But the other thing that I'm reading in your question is that you are having difficulty telling your supervisor this. So it's, how can I manage telling her that the time given is too short? So from that, I'm reading that you're worried about actually telling the supervisor this because they might react in a bad way, or you might feel uncomfortable telling them this. But certainly it's known that she's leaving, and you probably already under pressure to submit and to finish. I would be absolutely open with her in that regard and say exactly what your timeline might look like in achieving those deliverables, and to then have that discussion to see whether it is practically feasible or not. And if it is not practically feasible, then to have that already on the table so that it's really open and known, and that we can plan around that. So I definitely wouldn't keep it inside and sort of just hope for the best, and then eventually it crashes. So if you're thinking that it's going to be too much stress and it's not going to be possible, then go to her with your own proposal as to, I think it's going to take this long or that long, and then she'll be probably, I hope, happy to then arrange alternatives. And the school where you are will also be happy to know that, so that they can already start thinking, which I'm saying is they're leaving soon. I don't know how soon means. Okay, that's this year, but then maybe next year for 6 months there needs to be a caretaker in place, and the caretaker supervisor can already be sort of appointed, so that all three of you can already start working on this, so that there's a little bit of continuity between the supervisor that's leaving and the supervisor who's going to be your caretaker. So that would be my take on that.
Thank you very much, Prof. There's another question before I read it, just to add to what you said. One of the things about being in this space is professionalism. I know I'm coming out as a little bit harsh, but this is what I would tell my own students who I'm supervising. If you are my friend, this is what I would say. As soon as possible, have this conversation with your supervisor. Don't let it dwindle until a point where the supervisor almost thinks they have been expecting something by the end of the year and hasn't come. I'd rather you approach them than they approach you. These are some of the skills we are learning in terms of just being professional academics. I would encourage you, I know it might be a very difficult conversation, but I would encourage you as soon as you can. Please, I know you may not have the full plan in place, maybe put a plan together as Prof said, but please have that conversation. You might be pleasantly surprised at the support A that you might get to still hopefully try and get it done by end of this year, or B, a backup plan. One of the things I learned through my studies is we spend so much time in our head generating so much panic and fear for maybe things that don't really exist. And you don't also want to put yourself in that space, especially if you're trying to finish. So I'd encourage you to please have that conversation as soon as possible. We have one last question, which I'm going to read through. We have reached the timeline, so I'm kindly requesting for those that are still here to give us a few minutes, and then we'll be able to wrap up. The question reads, follow up to the question about having two or more supervisors. How do you handle a conflict of interest between or among supervisors and you're in the middle of the heat? This is one of the most difficult places for anybody to be in. I personally wasn't in, but I've known somebody who was. I'm going to call on Prof's experience to try and handle this. I'll give my version of the interpretation, how I think one can handle this, but Prof, you have a few more years, more lines on your tires on this one. Maybe you can come in and provide some insight. Prof?
Okay, certainly. So this is a perception that can exist. And as I said earlier on, if you have many, or at least more than one supervisor, it's good to have a main supervisor. And that main supervisor is the go-to person. And normally in a matter of conflict, they will have the deciding vote, if I can call it that. However, it comes down to the perception of a supervisor. So certainly if you've got two bosses and your two bosses are telling you to do different things, then you're in really big trouble, because how do you keep them both happy? But if you think about those people as being two advisors, then they're both giving you advice about how to conduct your research. And that advice might be in conflict with each other, it very well could be. But you as the researcher get to choose what advice are you taking. And I would not be offended if if someone were to not follow, say, advice that I am giving. I would always give advice in good faith, but I would not be insisting that a certain course of action be done or there's trouble. That happens when you are the boss. When you are the advisor can say, I think you're going down the wrong track over here for these reasons, and then you can take on those reasons and look at it carefully and make the decision yourself as to, do you want to continue on this path or not? So first of all, if you have a conflict between two bosses, bad idea. But if you've got a conflict between two advisors, that's not so unusual, because advice is something that you can take, and you can decide not to take that advice. However, you also want one person who's looking after your research, who is your main light, your main guiding light, the person who, when there is drama or conflict or terrible stuff happening, who can say, this is the direction that we're following, and finished. So I would always say, have a main supervisor or main advisor, and then have and listen to the main one more carefully. That's what I'll say here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I will just add briefly to say, similar to Prof, following the main advisor, but also if you feel that you're in the middle of it, I would encourage, I know I'm always about diplomacy, so I would encourage, if possible, for a sit-down meeting between the three of you. A lot of things, academics are also human beings, and sometimes misunderstandings of some kind sometimes can be addressed in a conversation, especially if you feel you're being caught in the middle of it. I know it might not be easy to be able to set up, but I would encourage you, if possible, because you're also an adult, Kayonde, I would kindly request, if possible, a meeting, a sit down, but now because of virtual, probably if it's you or if you know somebody who's in that space, even if it's a virtual meeting, just between all three of you, to try and address what could easily be what the misconception or the misunderstanding may have happened. For them to be working together, it means at some point there was agreement. They wouldn't have started the project without some form of agreement. So clearly something may have fallen away, and sometimes having that meeting to address it openly with everybody can help resolve the matter and help people move forward. And I think a space where people can, sometimes emails can be misunderstood and they swing around, or maybe things are handled in the wrong way. So if possible, I would advise that. And if it's still not coming to a point where it can be addressed, there are still structures within the school. My part is always to defend the student as much as possible. There are structures within the school where a third party can come in and try and assist if need be, because it's an unhealthy research environment. You should not be caught in the middle of the heat. Your job is to do your research and try to complete, and their job is to guide and advise. So you don't want this to be a continuous situation. So if that cannot be addressed internally, there are structures within every school that one can reach out to and capitalize on for us. Thank you. Those were my 2 cents on the matter. Desmond, to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, my resource people. I know that I could always count on you to deliver. And thank you so much, our cherished listeners. I hope you've picked 1 or 2 things that will guide how to manage your supervisor going forward. One of the things that Prof said that I think that it is worth noting is the fact that first you need to know yourself and also know your supervisor. That is very, very important. Then you can work from a place of knowing. Yes, and also Rodney also points to the fact that you need to make sure that he talks about timeline and the fact that we need to work together with the supervisor, have an expectation, and also make sure that you meet your supervisor's expectation. I think that this is very, very good. And I think for time, because we are 6 minutes above the scheduled time, I want to use this opportunity once again to thank the university and the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment, the ADU, the Directorate, and all my colleagues, and also to thank Prof for always being available to help share his wisdom with us. I think that it is worth noting. And so, Prof, we are grateful. Rodney, we thank you for your time, for taking time off your busy schedules this time that students are in all forms of crisis. Thank you so much to all my colleagues, Mahlati, Mike, and all the other team. I thank you. And please, we will send the videos to you guys. And also, I have sent in the chat area. Please go there and actually let us know what you think about this webinar, and also some of the topics you would want us to discuss or talk about, so that we can, Prof talked about targeted feedback, so that we can also look at what we can give you that will be more helpful. We thank you for coming, and I wish you all the best, and then the rest for the week. And then please, just let's stay in touch. If you have any questions or anything, just send me an email, and I'll make sure that I'll get them to Prof and Rodney. And if you have any assistance or anything is bothering you, reach out to the postgraduate support at the ADU. And then, like Rodney said, we will make sure that we use all structures to help you get there. Thank you all, and bye for now.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you, everybody. Have a lovely remainder of your week, and take care.